All right, welcome to the next lesson. This time we're going to be going over the Mycenaens. So in the last few lessons we've been covering just the idea of how the Greeks came about, the geography of the area, and the Minoans, and the disappearance of the overall disappearance of the Minoans. We've also talked a bit about why we continue to tell their mythological stories, you could say. What the purpose is, this whole storytelling. And we'll be getting a little bit more into that. Not as much as last time, at least in these videos. But we will be getting a little bit more into that. But now we're going to be going to Mycenaens. Now, you should have done the question, the Bellric questions leading into this already. And those questions were, well, first off, do you think rivalries are an overall good thing or bad thing to have in society? And then the second question was, name some rivalries that you're aware of. It's interesting to read the responses to this, and I also I have a lot of interest and have a lot of fun in the discussions that we have in class, based off of the first question especially. Do you think they're overall good and overall bad? And, usually what we do is we like to kind of put up on the board just what is the positives, what are the negatives, and there's some great arguments both ways. Are rivalries a good thing or bad thing in society? Now, the reason why we talk about rivalries, one, is just kind of get the idea of how do we think about this? What is it like in our society? How does our society view it? How do I view it? What are the positives for it? What are the negatives of it? If I like the positives, then how do we try to avoid those negatives of essentially like a healthy rivalry? But anyways, once we have that in our minds, well, then I like to start up the lesson on the Mycenaens because, well, we call them the Mycenaens, and just again to reiterate this, so many names that we have today are not names that they would have called themselves. These are names that we apply to them through either, in this case, mythological stories about them, but I kind of wonder what they would have called themselves. I had really no clue. Kind of like the ancient Harappans of India or the Indus River Valley civilization. That's just a name we gave them because of the name of the dig site. We really don't know. Mesopotamians, that's a Greek word for the people that lived in, Mesopotamia, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So, anyways, Mycenaens is another one of those names, and they are not, just to bring all this up, they're not a united people. From all that we can see and understand about their society, they are not a majorly united people. They're constantly fighting with each other. They're always bickering. They're separated in these individual cities and city-states. Anyways, I'll come back to that in a bit, but just keep that in your minds, this idea of rivalries and how I wanted to use the concept of rivalries leading into, talking about the Mycenaens. They are not a united people. They're always at each other's throats. So first off, though, please get down the information you see at the top. And those are rough dates, by the way. And again, they're around for about 500 years or so that we know of that the Minoans were around, but they last longer. Once the Minoans disappear off those islands, if you're looking at the map there, the Mycenaens go down and inhabit a lot of these islands that the Minoans just left. And again, how they left? No clue. At least I shouldn't say no clue. We don't have a certain idea on how the Minoans or why the Minoans just kind of disappear. Once they do, though, the Mycenaens are the dominant peoples of the Aegean world. Again, not united. This isn't like an empire. This is just the area of, okay, we're these people and we know about each other, and there we go. So, and when I say not united, always fighting each other at the bottom, one of the things I kind of got a kick out of in learning about them, both just growing up and then in college and then just studies afterwards, just because Greek history is a lot of fun, is that, they would fight each other how do I explain this? To kind of simply put it, we think of the seasons in a year of spring, summer, fall, winter. Through a lot of history, you got those seasons, you could say, or if you're in different areas of the world, like the idea of a wet season, dry season. But anyways, a lot of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, other areas of the world kind of look at it as, okay, you have planting season. Then you have the time where you're managing your crops, but you don't need as much effort on there. So that's when you go to war. That's when you can essentially have your war season. Then you have your harvest season. You don't want to be fighting during that time. You want to harvest everything up. And then a lot of times you have something like a winter, or a time where you just don't do anything. Weather's not so great outside, and you just hunker down and you wait for the next planting season, then war season. When we talk about the war season for the Mycenaeans, this is a little bit of a stretch, but I have fun with this. They kind of treat it like we do March Madness, at least from our understanding. At least, how do I put this? This is something we believe they did that we know the ancient Greeks did after them. But we believe the ancient Greeks got this idea from the original Mycenaean way of doing things, and that is cities would actually set up times to fight each other. I don't know if this happens, but in my mind I kind of imagine oh, hello, we'd like to set up a time to play you. This week doesn't work for us. How about next week? Next week doesn't work for you. Well, would you mind doing a doubleheader? I kind of get that idea when I think about this idea of just societies at war with each other, yet it's organized. And at the same time, when it comes to prizes, the losing side would always give the winning side a prize. Now, this is something where you do need to understand and have this down. Most definitely have this in your notes, is that when a city loses against another city, they often have to give something that they prize or something very valuable to them to the winning side. A trophy, you could say. Now, the item that is of the utmost importance is a horse. Horses are seen as a major source of wealth during the early Greek and ancient Greek times. And if you lose, well, here's my horse. That's a big deal. And if you're wondering if that has a little bit to do with, say, the story of the Trojan War and the Trojan horse, yeah, that gives you a lot of understanding there. So I'll get to that later, though. Now, and if you haven't heard the Trojan War, I'm sorry, but I imagine most of you have. So, now if you have nothing to give, you have no kind of prize materials to give, well, the last thing you give is your people. Not like all your people, but here, have little Leela and Johnny here. Take them, they're your slaves. Dang it, we lost. So, that's not what you wanted to give, but a lot of times it would turn into that. And from what I understand, it's not necessarily what you wanted to get either. It was we got enough people. So you just kind of have this idea that humans, as far as a resource in Mycenaean times, weren't seen as a major valuable thing to have, which definitely would be different in other civilizations throughout history, but it's interesting to note. So, but moving on, it's also during Mycenaean times that we see, you could say, what's called the rise of the polis. Just without going into this way too much, try to explain this as simply as possible. It's just a city. When you hear the term polis, just think city. But it's not just the city, it's the city and the land around it. So it's not like, how to put this? When we think of cities today, we think of just the more urbanized area. Big buildings. Once the buildings stop, the city stops. It's kind of our way of thinking of a city today. But that's not the way the Greeks think of their cities. The polis is that, yes, you have the urban area, like I show you some pictures here. The top left picture, I should say. But then it's all the land roundabout. It's your city, yes, but more importantly, it's all the farmland and pasture land and whatever other land you got, for mining and whatnot. It's just that's kind of attached to your city. It's part of your personal economy. So, and at the center of your city, they would have what's called an acropolis. And the best way I can associate an acropolis is like saying, hey, this is a downtown. This is downtown ancient Athens. This is downtown ancient Sparta. This is downtown ancient Corinth. And by the way, we're not really sure if those cities really existed during Mycenaean times. Most likely not. Yes, I know all the mythology talks about those cities, but it is believed that that's where they interject themselves into the story. I talked about that earlier, but anyways. Moving on. I'm sorry about that tangent. So, main point here is that you just have this idea of a polis. We call that a city. They have an acropolis. We call that a downtown. There's a couple things I would like to mention about the acropolis, though. There's certain aspects to it that were kind of a big deal. And the Acropolis of Athens, which is, I show a model of it, or a picture of a model of it in the bottom right, is by far one of the more famous because how to put it? It's one of the better acropolises of the time. They have a good spot. The Acropolis is there not just for the idea of like a downtown, like a meeting area, a market, which it is, but it's also a meeting area for religion. You have a couple temples there, most notably the Parthenon, temple to Athena. But then you have a lot of kind of like, I don't know how to, best way I can put it, a term we got here in Utah, that's a big thing here in Utah, like doomsday prepper type stuff. Acropolis is kind of like your prepper area. They have food storage there. You have your weapons and blacksmith stuff there. You build walls, just in case you got to hold out. You can deal with the siege for a long period of time. You want to have an internal source of water and things like that, which the Acropolis of Athens all had. It was a very defensible area. So, if it comes down to it, people can come there and hopefully seek refuge from whatever invader is coming through. Does it work all the time? No. We'll learn about that later on. The Persian Wars, where, yes, Athens is pretty much completely destroyed. They have to rebuild it. But that concept of Acropolis is kind of a big idea. And it goes back to the ancient Sumerians, and how they would build moats around their cities and get their cities' walls. And this idea of like when they get attacked, well, everybody come into the city as best as possible and protect yourself. Same idea. So, we don't think of downtowns like that necessarily today. If we were to get attacked, I doubt the first thing we'd think of is like, all right, everybody gather up your stuff and go to the big buildings downtown. Who knows, maybe, but I kind of doubt it. So, but that was the thought process back then. Now, getting back to just the main reason I'm talking about this is that we base a lot of what we talk about today, and even the structure, even how we build stuff or how we say certain words, off of this. The term police is based off of the Greek term polis. We say words like metropolis, Indianapolis, Minneapolis. These are names of cities and things like that. It's based off of the Greek word for it. And we know that Mycenaens, or at least the Greeks that we call Mycenaens, these early Greeks, they're the first ones that we know of to kind of have this concept of the polis, the city-state. Like we are the state, and that city-state over there, they're not us. And you get together, and not to get together, but then that's when you sign up for their whole idea of March Madness, I guess. So, moving on. The main way we know about Mycenaeans, and this is kind of like what we did with the Minoans, we're like, the main way we know about them is archaeology and mythological stories. And there's one specific mythological story that is centered around Mycenaean Greeks, and that is the Trojan War. I mean, all of early Greek history is centered around the stories of the Trojan War, and then later on the travels of Odysseus in the books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. If you have not heard of those, well, you should have by now. We'll talk more about who Homer is later and the impact of the Iliad and Odyssey, both in his time as well as our time. But mainly I'm bringing it up right now just to say this is like our go-to for just understanding their culture. Now, it's filled with stories that are just not believable. There's just no way some of this stuff really happened. But by the way, this is where we get the story of the Minotaur and King Minos and Theseus that I went over in a previous video with you. We get that from the book, the Iliad. It has tons more stories in there, a heck of a lot more stories. I mean, this is where you get the story of Hercules, a.k.a. Heracles, or originally known as Heracles, I should say. But even with all of that, it's because it's so unbelievable. We look at it, it's like, okay, what is the fact from the fiction? How can this help us understand what their life was like? And there's a heck of a lot of things to garner off of it, to draw from it, and just how they thought, what was important to them, what was not important to them, how they viewed the world around them, their belief systems and things like that. The belief systems are right there in front of you. They have the gods fighting with them during this whole war. But lastly, just to mention this one more time, get an idea of just how they thought and the idea of the morals of the story. What do they view as things that they want to see persist in their society and that they want to remember and continue on from generation to generation? We get that from the book of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And again, primary source of just learning who these people are. It's not itself really a primary source in the Mycenaeans because it's technically written hundreds of years after their disappearance. But anyways, I'll get to that later. Now, in class, I like going through the story of the Trojan War. I am not going to do that right here. I apologize. Maybe later on, once I have a little bit more time. And I can throw in a video just talking about the Trojan War, but it's kind of hard to do because, like I said, the whole Iliad, like everything is centered around the Trojan War. It would be a long video to really go through everything. So I'm just going to go through some very certain, how do I put this? I'm going to go through some major parts of the story. I'm going to be, here's some spoiler alerts basically, until I get to the end, but you need to know this because I'm then going to use these points from the Trojan War to then talk about what we think may have been the real situation behind the Trojan War. So, first off, the Trojan War starts with, or at least time-wise, from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, starts with what's called the story of the Judgment of Paris. Paris is basically a young prince from Kingdom of Troy that's on the eastern side of the Aegean Sea, over there in Turkey, and by the Hellespont. I hope you remember the geography we went over earlier. And it's said that the three goddesses, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, and were bickering with each other about who is the most beautiful. And they decide to settle it by going to basically a hormonal teenager, a kid named Paris. So anyways, just to sum up the story, they come to Paris and basically say, hey, will you choose one of us? By the way, this all has to do with an apple. That's why you see Paris holding an apple. And try not to get into too much of the details here. But basically they come to Paris and say, we're going to leave it to you to choose which one of us is like the most beautiful. That's what they're bickering about. I don't know if I just said that earlier, but that's what they're bickering about. Who's the most beautiful among us three? Which is kind of funny because Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty and love. Anyways, but they're bickering about it. And they give him a little bit of time to decide, day or so. I can't remember necessarily how much time. But of course, in between, like the gods and goddesses do, they like to cheat and do things their own way. So all three of them actually appear to Paris of Troy, and just basically bribing him with stuff. Like the first thing he's bribed with is, actually I can't remember who first comes up. I think it's Hera. And if I remember right, gosh dang it, now I feel like the story's going from me. Hera promises him basically eternal life, bases him immortality. You will live forever if you choose me. Choose me, and this is your reward. Athena then comes and says, if you choose me, I will make you the wisest man ever to have lived. And then you have Aphrodite coming, and she promises him and says, pick me, and I will give you the most beautiful girl that exists on earth today. And being the hormonal teenager, when it comes time to pick, he picks Aphrodite. So, by the way, I wasn't going to go into this, but I have fun with this. The moral of the story here, think about this for a second. He becomes very short-sighted with this. He's like, I want the pretty girl, and I want the pretty girl now. You promised her to me, Aphrodite. But if you were to live forever, if you're immortal, well, you kind of have all the time in the world to, at some point, be with the prettiest girl at whatever point in time there is in history. If you're the wisest person in the world, you probably have a good chance to basically be with who would maybe not necessarily be the prettiest girl, but the best girl to be with, who is going to be the best match for you type thing. You'll understand that. Anyways, I could start digging a hole through that whole thing. But anyways, that's the idea. But no, he's short-sighted. He's hormonal. He's like, I want the pretty girl now. Who cares about all these things like character? And that's how that goes. So that's the start of this thing. Aphrodite, though, basically says, all right, prettiest girl is a girl named Helen, who just happens to be married to the king of Sparta. Again, Sparta doesn't really exist during the Mycenaean times, but it's the mythology. And so Paris feels like he has the right to go down and basically steal Helen. Now, Helen, as far as the story goes, does fall in love with Paris, and she likes him. She goes with him. But still, that's infidelity right there. That's a nice affair, basically. So, but that's the beginning of this whole thing. And for some reason, the kidnapping of Helen, as they call this, is viewed as just this awful thing, not just against, say, King Menelaus is the guy's name, the king of Sparta, but against all of the peoples, the Mycenaeans, the Greeks. And even though they all don't like each other and they fight each other all the time, they decide, you know what? Let's get together and go destroy Troy and get Helen back. When you sit back and look at that, you're thinking, over one girl, okay, we'll just go with that. But according to the story, they do. They get together, they go and fight, and they have this 10-year-long war for the Battle of Troy. And this is where I'm skipping so much of the stories. I highly recommend going reading this. It is fun stuff. Oh, you actually get a lot of weird stories too, like the whole Mycenaens story we talked about in the earlier video. But they go through this whole thing. I shouldn't say it culminates, but like the big battle, the big like me versus you type of situation comes when you have a Greek hero, Achilles, going up against the Trojan hero, Hector. Cool part of the story, but at the same time kind of tragic all around. Again, I'll let you read it. So, but finally, in the end, after 10 years of fighting, or actually I don't know if the Iliad says it's 10 years, but a long time fighting, that the Greeks basically have to win this through doing something a bit devious. You could say they cheat in a way. No such thing as cheating in love and war, so as they say. But the Mycenaeans pull a trick. The Mycenaean Greeks pull a trick where they actually build a gigantic horse, Trojan horse. I imagine you've heard of it. And then they get on their boats and they leave. And then they leave the horse at the front of the gates of Troy, and basically saying, "Okay, you win." I think, like, it's one thing to say, "Okay, I had a Trojan horse, whatever." But after what I told you earlier in the video, that a horse was the symbol of like the biggest form of wealth to give over, saying you win. Well, yeah, that means something. Like in the course of the story and understanding those societies, that means a lot. The Trojans probably take that as a definite, we just won this thing type thing. So they bring in the horse, they have a big huge party, we finally won, we're safe, blah, 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 blah. And they all get drunk and kind of pass out. They're not watching the gates or anything like that. And when everybody's kind of just done partying and they're all asleep or passed out or whatever, there were some people inside the Trojan horse. And so some Greek heroes get out. They open up the gates, and in the night the ships had come back and unloaded the Greek army, and they come in and then they just destroy the city of Troy. Very few survive. Lots of crazy things happen. A lot of bad things happen. The Greeks even defile a bunch of temples and stuff like that, and that leads into the book The Odyssey later on. So, but that Trojan horse thing, that's a big story in our society today. This idea something might not be what it appears. Be careful, he might not be your friend. She might not really be your friend. She might be just trying to use you, and in the end, they'll destroy you type thing. So heck, we even use that for computer viruses, a file that doesn't seem what it is, don't click on that link type thing. It's not really what you think it is. It's a Trojan horse. So, again, I didn't mean to go into that much of it, but the major part I wanted to get to was the Trojan horse. Definitely wanted to talk about the Helen being kidnapped part, because that brings us into... Oh, sorry. You talk about this first. For the longest time, we believed that... I shouldn't say we, but people in the past believed that the Trojan War definitely was just a myth. There's no way that could be real. It's a fun story. It's fun to read about. Dress up like one of the heroes during Halloween or something like that, but it's not real. Until, I believe it's the late 1800s, a guy who just really wanted to find out if it was true or not actually excavated the city of Troy itself and found out that yes, it did exist, and there's tons of evidences of this major city of Troy, of ancient Troy, not being destroyed just once, but actually something like 6 or 7 times. And it's believed that the third time it was destroyed was the actual Trojan War. There's a lot of evidences towards that just match up with the mythology as well as just overall idea of other archaeology of the time. That show the times, I should say. It's believed that the Trojans were most likely part of the Hittite Empire, those Hittites that we talked about back with ancient Egypt. I don't know if that's fully confirmed, but that would make sense in the general geographic region. Also makes sense why they were viewed a bit different. They're not necessarily Greek, but they at least know of Greek ways, but they're a different type of people. That kind of makes sense. But now it's believed that this happened. Just like we know that the Palace of Knossos there and the Minoans happened. Just what else? Like the Zhao dynasty. We thought that was fake, but now we know it happened. So what from the mythology then is based off of reality? What's true about it and what isn't? And basically for forever we've been trying to pick out Okay, what was true? What really is the basis behind the Trojan War? What happened there? And here's the best theory that at least I could see, or that we could come up with as to why the Trojan War happened. Now, this is a map showing essentially the route that the Greeks take up to Troy. And I probably should have showed you something like this beforehand in the beginning of this whole video, just where Troy is. So again, you have the Mycenaens. I don't know if you can see my marker, but basically mainland Greece, Crete, that's the Mycenaean areas. And then you have Troy up here, right on the Hellespont, eastern Turkey, or Eastern Asia Minor, however you want to say that. So, in reality, why would people who are not united and don't like each other finally unite and go attack one other person? Best argument would be, probably has to do with trade and prosperity. If I were to zoom this map out, I probably should have been more prepared and had a map here, that Hellespont, that narrow neck of water that's going through there, that connects into the Black Sea, which actually has a lot of Greek settlers up there, and then a lot of great farmland. And there's a lot of trade that goes back and forth from the Aegean Sea up to the Black Sea. Heck, probably family members have gone off and just set up a new colony up there. And all of a sudden, any city that's controlling that Hellespont, that little waterway, they can get filthy rich off of that. They can set up tolls, taxes on people coming through. And you could get this idea probably that, well, one of two ways. The people of Greece, mainland Greece, as much as they don't like each other, they realize those people of Troy are controlling us, like they're kind of sucking our riches away, which, hey, that could be Helen right there. Instead of Helen being the most beautiful thing in Greece, it wouldn't be a person. Maybe it's talking about the idea of a way of life, just the ability to have a good life, a beautiful life. So they suck it away from you through more taxes and things like that as ships going through, or maybe closing it off and not allowing you to get through. Or maybe there's just more on the side of greed, like the Mycenaean Greeks realize, why do we keep paying them when we could control it ourselves? And the fact that that place has been destroyed 7 times over, and we know that's one of the most fought over areas of all basically antiquity and post-classical time periods, medieval times is basically what I'm talking about. It makes sense. It's a major link of a major area of trade right there, and has been fought over for quite a while. So this whole idea that, Helen is just this symbolism of the beauty of basically a good life, a rich life, that makes sense. And how that could basically unite a bunch of people against another kind of common enemy, that also makes sense. Again, we don't know for sure, but that's a possibility. Anyways, that's the Mycenaeans at this point. Up to this point. In the next video, I will be talking more about just how they decline. So I'll see you guys later.